Guys, I'm gonna talk to you guys about the comic book industry and how it's relevant to all of your lives. Before I start off, I'll give you guys a little fun fact. According to Lance Whitney, a staff writer at CNET.com, one of the holy grails of comic books, published in 1938, Action Comics #1, was sold for about $2.3 million. That's pretty expensive considering that there's only 50 left that are unrestored in any sort of way. The pages are all white. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna talk to you guys about is a brief history about comic books. Second thing I'm gonna talk to you guys about is its current standing in today's time and and the media. And the third thing I'm gonna talk about is its cultural influence and relevance. Now, as I said, the first thing I was to talk about is a brief history. Comic books started out in like the early 1910s, 1900s. They derived from comic strips, the little funny things you see on the newspapers towards the end. They started from those. From there, they got some traction from various writers like Stan Lee and artists like Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and they ended up becoming their own industry altogether. Now let's fast forward to around 1960, 1980, where comic books were a weird notion. Like if you read comic books, you were uncool. You weren't the popular kid at school. You were probably living in your mom's basement, eating chips, whatever. And yeah. So second thing I'm gonna talk about is how comics are in modern day and time. More modernly, the comic books are bigger. Ever since like 1990, when the first few comic book movies came out, like Spider-Man and so on, they've been getting bigger. They're more mainstream. Now, if you read comic books, you're pretty much cool. There's like several TV shows like Arrow, Flash, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And for the foreseeable future, you're gonna notice a lot of comic book movies from DC to Marvel, and even indie ones. Like the indie genre is so much good as just the whole superhero notion. You have like titles like Black Science, like which is a time thriller with classic sci-fi feel, with like really ugly creatures that are disgusting but look pretty badass on paper. And then you have like The Walking Dead or the epic saga of Fables, or if you're into the whole serial killer genre, there's Nailbiter. It's pretty disgusting. I wouldn't recommend it if you're not like a hardcore gore fan, and so on. Now, the third thing I'm gonna talk about is how it has a cultural influence, and you see it through the comic books. Now, what you guys may not know is most comic books usually mirror the time of the decade. For example, in like the 1960s, the whole civil rights movement, the one comic book that really mirrored them was the X-Men. They were totally about a group discriminated by humans and some of the other metahumans. They were totally fearful, and some back history, like the writers who created like Charles Xavier and Magneto, they mirrored them after Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. There's other ones that also mirror a bunch of the things going on in the public. And more recently, they just changed one character's title and gave it to a young Muslim girl, which is pretty fascinating because this is the first time ever you've seen this in recent time. Other things are like there's a lot of gay characters. There's a North Star, an X-Men, not Catwoman, Batwoman. She's lesbian, and more recently, Catwoman just came out as being bisexual, which I thought was pretty fascinating. Even though, if you read any of the comic books, you get a pretty info vibe about why and how that happened. And they also have extremely great storylines that kind of reflect certain things, like the Civil War reflected like how much we should know about certain things, but in their thing was like how much the humans should know about their superheroes, or Injustice, like how the Injustice comic book by DC, or about how much like power, how amount of power would one person go, which is Superman in that. whole instance. And overall, like you guys know what you're gonna be see. The most relevant thing is you guys are gonna see a lot of things, a lot of comic book movies. I know they just recently announced that Valiant, which is a separate, more grittier, grounded superhero universe, is getting their own TV series line, and movie line. And like I said, the 3 points were like a brief comic book history, more modern. Second point was more modern time, and my last point was like a more cultural influence. And yeah, that's pretty much it.